Susan Taylor, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
Thank you. I'm well, Elliot. Really, really appreciative that you've invited me to join. Thank you.
I'm very excited to have you here. Really excited to dive into our conversation too. But before we do, can you give my listeners a little context of who you are and what it is that you do?
So, I'm basically a mindset coach and facilitator. I work with individuals, groups, and organizations as a way to help people uncover their deeper purpose or maybe rediscover that purpose as a way to tap more into who they are as human beings and then link those passions and sense of purpose to the work that they do in the world for a fulfilling, meaningful life.
Very strong. I love that. Very short and sharp, but very meaningful as well. And where did this all start for you? Have you been doing it for decades? Is it something you tapped into in the later stages of your career and life? When did it all begin for you?
Actually, it all began for me when I was on maternity leave at age 28.
Oh, wow.
After graduating from college, I had been working in the corporate world, and I ended up with 12 weeks maternity leave. And as I was holding this newborn in my arms, something really just shifted inside of me. And I said, wow, like there's something really missing in the corporate world with regard to how we interact with one another and oftentimes how we're treated. And I don't want to be part of that world. So I actually started my own business while I was on maternity leave, creating an opportunity where people could come and use different services while they were traveling on business. So at first it was a bricks and mortar in Raleigh, North Carolina. And my goal was to try to create a more intimate, more human, more connecting environment for people. And so people could come who were traveling on business to just kick back, relax, have a private room, to have meetings, conferences, secretarial services. So the way I talk about it now, of course, is I was at first a bricks and mortar VA before VA even was a thing, because when I moved from Raleigh, North Carolina, I ended up doing it all remotely. So that's how it all started.
Wow. And I can imagine that that was maybe a couple of decades ago now. So what do you feel the landscape of that environment is like today? Has it changed a fair bit? Do you feel that if someone was at your age, 28, 29, when they got pregnant and they were on maternity leave now, do you think that they would have that same mindset that you had? Or do you think things have changed for the better or worse since that moment?
So to answer the first question, it was actually 31 years ago, 1993. So it's been a while. It's been a hot minute, I think is what's the term today? It's been a hot minute. I would say since then, I at least in my experience, Elliot, there's definitely, I think, more openness around these sorts of what people often describe as softer skills. Because I think in that people are realizing that the soft skills are actually the hard skills, like doing some of the work, for example, around mindsets and trying to be more open to diverse opinions and holding different points of view as a way to create harmony instead of defending my point of view as it's right, full stop, period. So I've just noticed that there's a lot more energy, I would say, toward creating organizations and teams that are purpose driven and values based. So that's become definitely a little more mainstream since I was kind of out there doing it in a way where these things were always the underpinning. And yet I found it a bit challenging to speak more to that, I'd say, emotional, spiritual element of what I'm talking about here, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like you said, was the early 90s. And so much has changed since then. And you hear a lot of different things about, like you said, values, diversity and inclusion, all the things that just weren't even in existence at that stage of, corporate life and the corporate environment. So I can imagine an enormous amount has changed. And do you ever reflect on what your life might look like if you never took the path of going solo and doing your own thing?
That's a really interesting question. I've never really thought about it looking back. I tend to be more of a forward-looking person because I guess the way I would answer that question is instead of looking to the past, I try to stay in the present. And when I feel that kind of feeling that I know and recognize in my body that something's a little off kilter with regard to me staying on that path of trying to put energy toward the things I feel passionate and purposeful about, that's kind of my indicator. And it's a way to, I think, keep me motivated and inspired to move forward as opposed to looking at the past and trying to compare because I can't change anything that happened then. So I'm looking forward to how to take what I am experiencing in the present. And as I do that, look to the future and try to bring that here in the here and now right? So create my destiny, create my future through the way I feel about the work that I'm doing or the situations I'm in or the relationships that I'm engaged in, to make sure as often as I can notice that they're on track with what I feel in my heart and even in my soul, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have that same mindset back in 1993 when you were on maternity leave? Because of obviously having, I assume it was your first child, and then also going into a stage where you're leaving a comfortable, probably well-paying job for the uncertainty of starting your own business. That's quite a big thing to do at that stage, especially when you are now responsible for a little person's life, right? It must have been a big, big step for you. So did you have that same mindset at that moment of like, okay, well, I can't think about what will be if I stay in this job, and I can't think of, the position it's put me in right now. I just know that I need to look forward and do what's best for me and the future of my family.
Absolutely. It was more of a calling, and it was more of something that I could not do, I guess is how I would say it. And it was, yes, partly about me and what I felt I was here to do in this world with my unique gifts, because we all have those unique gifts. And also, how are we setting the stage more consciously for the generations that follow? So that shared, I hear you, because it was security that then became unsecure. And I tend to have a pretty good risk tolerance. So I think I had that entrepreneurial spirit already inside of me. I've always been much more inclined to kind of like work alone and kind of take risks. And I have a creative kind of spirit in a way. So it's like jumping off the cliff and kind of building the parachute on the way down. I think that's oftentimes how entrepreneurship is described. That just fits kind of my MO. It just kind of links and aligns with me. I think it's in my DNA somehow. So yeah, it's not for the faint of heart for sure, especially starting a family. And truth be told, as part of that, when Carol Ann, she's my first of two daughters, when she was born, and that's when I started the business, we ended up needing to move away from Raleigh when she was just, 8 or 9 months old, because my husband lost his job. So it was like a series of all these things happening with a lot of uncertainty. And yet I just tried to stay true to my heart. And
it seems as if it all paid off in the end. So I'm glad that you did. And hopefully that gives people inspiration, because a lot of people will say, like, I've just had a child. And I do honestly encourage people not to take 10,000 different risks at the same time, or like maybe, if you're having a baby, it's not the time to, start your health and fitness journey, build a business, find yourself all at the same time. Sometimes those things don't work out, but at many moments, like you've kind of alluded to, is that if you know that inner calling is just too strong to deny at a certain moment, who's to say it's the right or wrong time? And as long as you're not kind of unbalancing yourself to a major degree, clearly you knew your capabilities of looking after your first child and doing the business at the same time. Obviously you had the support of your husband as well. So those things all play a part in making that decision as well. So it's nice to see a different side of the story because of, again, who says it's the wrong time? And sometimes when it comes to things like callings, they don't come on cue, or they don't come when we think they should come. They just come when they need to come, right?
Right. And I think to your point, I think it's a really profound point, Elliot, because the way I would respond to that is it's not an either or. I mean, for example, I could have found a way to keep some financial sustainability while I'm also exploring other aspects of what I feel called to do, right? So for me, it's about how do we shift from either or thinking that it needs to be one way or the other, which is also now part of my work, and find the and, because the thing that I love about what you said is the calling might not come at the most opportune moment. And yet I think it does, because it's that challenge, right? It's that one moment when we ask ourselves, am I going to cross the threshold and say yes to what my heart is telling me I should be looking at? And that oftentimes comes at the most inopportune moment, at least in my experience. And it's a series of up and downs all the time. I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is if I can just keep checking in with myself, that's the key. And I can find different ways to get to where I want to go. It might not be that straight line that we all desire. I think, especially now in a world where there's like so much instant gratification, it's going to be this kind of like up and down and ebb and flow and indirect line to continue on the path. So that's how I would respond to that. And.
Yeah, I like that perspective as well, because of when things like that end up happening. And I don't love this. And obviously you have been a parent much longer than I have because I haven't been one yet. But I always like to have this opinion, which I don't think I'm yet entitled to have, but I do. But I never like it when people come to me because I'm a health and fitness coach, right? And I work with a lot of people who go through challenges, who are looking to try and prioritize themselves. But many times, and this is not always, but I do hear it come up from time to time, is that they make their children out as if they are burdens. It's like, well, I have to look after the kid and I have to take them here and here and there. And they kept me up all night. And I get that a lot of the aspects of parenting are hard. And this is where, I have to tread on my, like very, very delicate line of not offending people too much. But at the same time, I do have the opinion of like, you chose to bring them into the world. And now you're telling me how much of a burden they are and how you can't prioritize yourself or all these other type of things. So I love the fact that you said and, because a lot of people have this mindset of like, okay, when I bring a child into the world, it's all about them and it's nothing about me anymore. So I can no longer go on that business venture. I have to give up my dreams. I can't be in shape. I can't exercise. I can't give myself time. Whereas I love to hear your perspective of saying, well, actually, of course, you've got this big responsibility. Of course, there is something that's going to take up a significant portion of your time, but it's not as if everything ended for you as soon as their life begun, which sometimes I feel like parents get a little bit caught up into that trap. Is that something you see, or is it something that maybe I'm giving an opinion that's a little bit too strong?
I say, trust your opinion.
There we go.
Yeah, for sure. I think, look, we're trained, I think, to be more supportive of other to a detriment of supporting ourselves. Emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, and even physically. And I'm sure in your career and in your industry, you see a lot of this, right? The different emotional aspects that also play a role in the physical that affect I'll call it the spiritual and the intellectual. So I get this a lot. And at the same time, on the other side of that coin, because I try to see things as holistically as possible, I know so many people, at least that I've worked with, who have started their own businesses while they're raising a couple of young children, as a stay-at-home mom, for example, because they finally have that moment where it clicks and it's like, well, wait a minute, what actually am I teaching my children if I am dedicating every waking hour to them? I'm not teaching them self-care. So how can we kind of reframe it in a way where we understand that they watch us? They don't only soak things up that we say, they're watching our behaviors. So how are we paying attention to how we're teaching our children with regard to living a fulfilling life ourselves? It's the oxygen mask, right? You have to have that for yourself in order to give it to somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. It's powerful and it's a nice reminder. And I think that anyone who is in that position right now, like I get that it's also easy to get caught up in certain behaviors and patterns that you've probably been in for a while. But I think that the biggest resistance I have is when you ask someone to start with 5 minutes and they tell you they don't have 5 minutes. And that's when I think, that's when the system's a little bit broken and things need to be worked on. Because if you don't have 5 minutes for yourself, then, how are you possibly surviving? And how are you possibly, like you said, leading by example? Is that the type of thing you want your child to think of in the future when they have children, that they never have 5 minutes to themselves? Because of, honestly, it doesn't look like a very desirable lifestyle to live, to be completely honest, not having 5 minutes for yourself. And the reality is obviously, as we all know, is if you go to those 5-10 minutes and much more to yourself whilst keeping the balance and still being able to look after your children, then you show up better for everyone. And most importantly, yourself, right?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has 5 minutes. And here's why. We all get the same amount of hours in the day. I think it's 168 hours a week. We all get that. It's finite. So for me, it's not even about the 5 minutes. I have to ask myself the question, where am I placing my energy to believe that I don't have 5 minutes? Because for me, it's not time management. You can't manage time. We all get the same amount. It's finite. What we can manage, though, is our energy. So when I get that a lot in my coaching sessions, that's how we kind of talk about it. And again, I think that this idea of burnout or overwhelm or overactivity has much less to do with time and hours and constant do. It also has to do with where we're putting our energy and what we're doing. Because if I continually put energy into things, using your words earlier, that feel like a burden, that is contributing more to my burnout than whether I can say I have 5 minutes or not. Do you see the difference there? And so I think for me, it's about how do we manage our energy. And how am I consciously asking myself, is my energy moving me more toward the things that feel fulfilling, more toward my goals, or taking them taking me further away from them. It's that constant dance between those two things.
Absolutely. And I want to stay on that energy piece, actually. I was going to go more for the bigger picture, but I'm curious now that we've entered into this space in the sense of, obviously, we all have, like you said, those same X amount of hours, but realistically, I know this to be true as well, is that even if you cut down the amount of hours someone spent on doing something, they would probably still put the same amount of energy towards it. And with the hours that they aren't doing that thing, they might spend hours dreading doing that thing, or thinking about how much they don't want to, or stressing about that thing, so that they then end up investing the same amount of hours because they're investing the same amount of energy, or they end up just kind of even putting the same amount of energy, but their tolerance goes down, for example. So if we're in a position, first things first, I think that the main thing that maybe you're saying here is that if you're putting your energy into that in such a way, maybe to readjust your relationship with it, readjust whether you should be doing it. Where do you go about with energy? Maybe this is a better question to ask you, is that if you've got something, obviously we've put children in this situation here, obviously you have to put energy into them. So how do you reframe your relationship with, I don't have any time for myself, my children are challenging because of X, Y, or Z reason? What do you do with that when your children aren't going anywhere and you've chosen the responsibility of raising them, and you want to do that with love, care, and abundance, but all you're thinking about is how sleep deprived you are, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely. So using your example, I don't have any time for myself. What if I were to reframe that and say, I need time for myself? And then how do you expand that to teach our children that mommy needs just 5 minutes? And this is what mommy does, which gives them the cue that I'm taking those 5 minutes for myself, whatever that means. So oftentimes, and I'll just be transparent with my own children to give a real example, they knew that when I went into my study and closed the door, that was like do not disturb time. And at first, I just started doing it for like a minute or two. And I'm talking obviously about when the kids are a little bit older, because you're not going to leave toddlers and infants unattended. So please, they were always attended. They were always attended to. There was always a watchful eye. At the same time, I was trying to teach them a habit. I was trying to teach them that it's important to take that moment for self-care. And then as it advances, and let's say you bring it into the business world, because that's where I do most of my work, it expands there, right? How many schedules can you see where it's back-to-back Zoom meetings all the time now? Or before the pandemic, back-to-back meetings in your office. That moment in time that I taught the children now comes into their business life, because guess what? They put at least a 5 to 15 minute window between every single meeting or every single appointment. Why is that? Because how can I listen to somebody else and be as present as I possibly can be if my battery's running out? So it's really just how do we recharge? And that's all it is, just like a computer or an iPhone, or pick something, right? It all needs to recharge. It all needs a reboot. And when it links to energy, and then I'll stop. I worked with a gentleman a long time ago. His name is Tony Schwartz. And he really has developed these amazing programs around how you manage your energy, And it's important because what I learned from him is that every 90 minutes, our brain needs a reboot. It just needs a break to stop taking in information and thinking and reflecting. So I think that's really important. And whether we're working out in a gym, we have rest days, right? You build up the muscle, you break it down. You do, several days of cardio, but then you need that rest day. It's the same process. Just different ways of thinking about it.
Yeah, I like that. And in terms of something that maybe you're recognizing that, like you realized when you were on maternity leave as well, okay, I'm in an environment that I don't think is going to fulfill me long term, that takes up a lot of my energy, and maybe it's more optional, right? Your children, once you've had them, they're certainly not optional anymore, but maybe a job that you chose is. Would you ever encourage someone to weigh up the pros and cons and think, well, I guess the answer is, first, try to manage your energy and do the best things that you can to get yourself in the best possible position. And then if you're finding that things aren't working, is there a conversation with yourself about leaving, or is it something you have to stick with? What's your thoughts on that, and where do you stand on that?
Right. I get this question a lot, especially with people who might be unhappy in their work environment, for example, right? I think there's 3 areas to consider. The first is go along to get along, which I do not recommend, because that is even more draining than working a 16-hour day, multiple days a week. The middle ground, and this is the important piece for me, is if I'm not getting the energy in my workplace, where can I get some energy to fuel me so that my reserves are high, my battery is fully charged before I go into work, while at the same time exploring different options that might exist, because it's about intention. And the intention is I don't feel well, I'm drained, I'm tired, I'm not as happy as I feel I could be, whatever is coming up for people. Find a way to get that outside of the situation that drains you as a way to fuel you to deal with it, cope with it, whilst at the same time considering other options. Then, of course, the third bucket, if you will, is quit. And a lot of people don't have that luxury per se because of the financial conditions or culturally or in their family, their back, like whatever is going on for them. So I think it's like aim smart, right? I think we've heard the term a lot, aim smart. It's this idea where you don't want to like jump off that cliff necessarily because you need to be stable and you need to have a foundation to provide in whatever situation you're in. So aim for that middle ground to where it's a stretch for you because you are exploring. So you're challenging yourself to say that I'm stuck and I need to stay here, while getting energies, things that make you feel fulfilled and feel meaningful to you, to, keep you kind of on that track. And I find that that's what I did for myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's nice. I think it gives people options. And I think that's the most important thing, is that when you're in one of those positions, at least having the clarity of what you can and can't do in those situations is probably the key to success. Because of a lot of the time we get in this mindset of like, well, I can't leave my job because of X, Y, or Z. But then you open up the door to maybe doing a side hustle for a few hours a night, so many nights per week. And then you see where that takes you. And then that gives you another opportunity. And I think that that's the key, is just recognizing that you do have choices. And as long as you can align them to your personal circumstances, then that's going to be the key to success. And it doesn't have to be jump the ship and then, leave yourself with a lot of difficulties off the back of that, which were much harder than your job in the first place. But it's recognizing that, okay, well, there isn't one way to do everything. And it might just be exploring this way or exploring this way. And that might lead you to more success than, potentially the obvious choice of just jumping ship. I always ask people, could it be worse? And it's not necessarily a position you necessarily want to be in, but could it be worse? And they're like, well, once you start to summarize it, my boss, I don't really love working for them. Their attitude does bother me. But at the end of the day, I've got a lot of friends and that I like and colleagues and stuff. So maybe I can stick it out for this next 6 months or so whilst I work on the other thing. And I think that sometimes, again, a little bit of perspective helps people align and just say, and it's the same thing. It's like, do you really have 5 minutes in a day? Could you find that? And like you said, maybe the question of, well, where are you placing your energy that you don't have those 5 minutes? And it just opens up people's horizons a little bit more, I think, to the point where they can actually make a decision that really does truly help them.
Absolutely. And linked to your question, because I love your question, could it be worse? The question I often share as well, which is similar, is what am I believing to be true? To feel like I'm stuck? Because if I can just ask myself that question, it just acknowledges what's going through my mind. And our brain is designed to protect, like there's a biological thing going on here too. So it's a mindset piece, right? It's a physical, experiential piece, but it's also a biological component to it. And that is, the brain is designed to protect us. It's why we have that famous fight, flight, freeze response, especially under stress or crisis, right? Because it's about survival of the species, if you will. So that biological thing is happening. And what I've learned is to kind of trick my brain a little bit, because I am grateful that those thoughts come into my head because my brain is trying to protect me. And so I just ask myself, what am I believing, or what do I have to believe is true that I feel stuck and can't make a different choice? Because it kind of signals the brain, okay, I heard you. I heard you. I acknowledge you. Awesome. And now I got this. I'm going to contemplate a little bit. I'm going to play with some different ideas. And it's just a way, I think, to kind of bring wholeness to the whole situation from an emotional, a mindset, an intellectual, physical, and biological perspective. Because that part's not going to change if our brains are healthy and functional. We're constantly going to get those moments where it's the fight, flight, freeze. We're wired for that.
Yeah, I think it's nice to just put it under the x-ray a little bit and just be like, okay, well, what's really going on here? And like you said, opening yourself up to new opportunities and beliefs. And obviously something you work on a lot is people's fulfillment, finding their purpose. And I find that a big part of the challenge that a lot of us face is that we do things and we travel down a path that we think is going to be right for us, right? We potentially climb the corporate ladder, or we go down the path of picking our university subjects as this, and we think this is going to be the career that lights up our lives. And then we find ourselves in our 30s or late 20s or 40s or even 50s and realize, well, actually, this wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And as much as maybe I've got a good paying job on the outside looking in, on paper, things look great, I'm just not lit up inside of myself. I just feel like something's missing, a little bit flat. Why is it that we find ourselves in that position? Are we not smart enough to make the choice of like, this is the right one for us? Or do you think we make that choice early? Why do you think that so many of us find ourselves traveling down a path that's ultimately not right for us?
I think it's socialized into us in a way. So I'll speak in terms of the United States because that's where I live and that's where I was born and raised. So I start with education. And I start with education because, our beliefs, our set of beliefs, our belief system is embedded in us by age 8. We have 8 years to develop healthy beliefs. And I don't think a lot of people know that. And so, that's interesting in and of itself, at least to me.
Absolutely.
Yet when I think about going to school and I think about how it's structured and I think about what I'm supposed to do and how I need to have the right answer to get the higher grade, to be able to be successful, it's kind of wired into us a little bit. I think, from our parents, our caregivers, our schools. And that's not a criticism. I think it's just we're doing the best we can and we constantly kind of repeat what we think we know. Then when we get into adulthood and we're kind of on our own a little bit, I think that different life experiences come our way, which disrupt that training, if you will. And we start to question. And I think depending on where people are in their mindsets and whether those mindsets are more predominantly fixed instead of being more growth oriented, kind of dictates at what age, so to speak, when we start to have these other ideas like, is this all there is? Seriously? And I get that all across the board. People, to your point, who have climbed that corporate ladder, they've got everything they should have, which equates success. The beautiful family, the home, the car, the boat, the job. They've made it. They've got tenure. They've got a retirement plan, all these sorts of things. And they're so unhappy. It's like something's missing for them. And that's a lot around the work that I do with regard to what does it take to reignite your spirit in ways where you can generate authentic wealth. And I don't mean just financial, but authentic wealth, lasting relationships. That's a big one. And vibrant health, because they're all connected. They're all connected. And when we're drained, our system is not working properly and we're not in harmony with how the system, our human system, is supposed to work.
And where do we get started with reigniting our spirit? Because that sounds like a lot of effort and a lot of work, especially when we've been fixed in our ways for many years as well. Like I said, people might have this discovery. I'm sure the people you work with aren't 22 years of age. They're probably more like 42 years of age or 52 years of age. They've gotten to a stage where, I think that a lot of us were so distracted with life. And then it's only like the pandemic was a massive one for many people where it just opened up their eyes to their reality, right? But otherwise it comes in different shapes or form. Maybe it's a midlife crisis. Maybe it's just a bad dream that they had, or maybe it's a holiday and they getting emails here, there, and everywhere. And they have this realization of like, well, this isn't what I was looking for when I set out on this path, but this is where I am. So how do we go about starting that work, which probably seems pretty large for a lot of people who have been maybe stuck in the habits and cycles? Obviously, you said we've built our belief system since we've been 8 years old, and then we've layered on societal expectations, and we've got 2 decades in a certain career when we've been told that this is the right thing to do. How do we go about saying, well, actually, no, maybe, like you said, opening up the and, not the or, but maybe this is a situation where their career isn't for them and they do want to go for something completely different. So what do we do with that when it seems like a lot of work, when we've already built up so much for ourselves that we have to kind of let that go in order to go down this new path in our lives?
Absolutely. I'd say first and foremost, just give yourself some ease and grace. We all do the best we can with what we know in any moment. Honor that. The second thing I would share, Elliot, is the body never lies. The body never lies. So how can we try to get into a bit of a habit where we listen more to our body? So for example, when I get up in the morning, what is my body feeling? Is it feeling heavy? Is it feeling like a sense of dread because our emotions are in the body. And on the other side of that coin, am I feeling excited, ready for the day? Just start paying attention to the body because, again, the body never lies. And that helps us then, I think, get out of this idea that it's work or a burden or too much effort. Because I'd offer the counter question. Do I want to leave this planet with regret? Do I want to have taught my children to just do what they're trained to do through what they learn through their parents and education and what have you? Do I want to show up in ways where I get in the car or come into the office to be on Zoom for my job and just feel like I want to cry instead of being there in ways that feel productive and exciting? Like, what's the cost? At what cost? Why would I not want to put effort into myself? I'm putting it into my children, linked to the earlier part of the conversation. How am I teaching them then for them to put it in there? Because that's what I want for them. Why is it that I want them to put effort into what brings them joy and happiness? But I'm sitting over here, struggling and sabotaging, if you will, myself. Because I have these different ideas about the way the world should work. So I think maybe that's another way. And I've rambled a bit, but if I can expand it, look, linked to the very beginning of this conversation. If I really feel that strongly that it's my job to raise these children to the best of my ability and create a future for them that I would love for them to have, then I should be putting energy toward that. And it starts with me. Because if I'm not here for whatever reason, I'm sick or I'm drained or I'm depressed or I'm fill in the blank, that is not in service to the very thing I say is most important to me, my children. So again, listen to the body. The body will tell you. And it doesn't lie. We don't have to get into the head games and, the devil angel, he said, she said, right? It's the body will tell you. It's why we get chills on the back of our neck when we're feeling in danger. It's why we get butterflies in our stomach when we have that kind of stage fright thing going on. It's why we might get goosebumps or chills when we feel like, oh yeah, this feels true and real. Like the body never lies. Listen to the body.
And what advice do you have for people who maybe have turned off those signals over the year? I think we do a good job of that, right? We quiet down the aches and pains and we put it down to something more physical than emotional. So for those people who've maybe silenced those signals a little bit, how do you encourage them to start listening to them again and start to listen to the intuition that they have, but has maybe been buried down over years of necessity or supposed necessity at least?
Absolutely. So first of all, they need to have a desire to want to. They have to want to. If they want to, then there's lots of different ways, and it needs to resonate with them, I would say. So for example, maybe people like to journal. They could take some time to journal about some of these things. Again, it's about giving yourself that break from all the automatic things that I think exist now and the acceleration of life in general. For the love of God, get outside, get outdoors. I think nature has an amazing way of kind of putting things in perspective. At least it does for me. So I'm biased there because I love being outside. I do not sit in front of this computer for any more than 90 minutes without going outside for at least 15. I've created a habit for myself, right? Maybe there's other things that they're interested in. I oftentimes hear about people who like to jog or run, whether it's on the treadmill or outside. They kind of get into that space where they're not really thinking about anything. And by the way, for athletes, they're already paying attention to their body. So how can I make that association, right? If I'm an athlete, I listen to my body when I'm working out. Why wouldn't I do it for the rest of the day kind of thing? So those are just some ideas that come up spontaneously. But the foundational thing is you have to want to. And until the pain of doing it becomes less than not, you won't. It's like any sort of habit. It's like breaking any sort of thought pattern or habit or change. It's a transition that we need to go through. The pain of actually doing it has to feel less than staying where you are. And until that shift occurs, you're status quo.
That is the case often enough. And when it comes to finding our calling and essentially knowing that it's going to be the right thing for us, obviously yours came when you were in maternity leave and you're like, I just knew that was the right thing to do. Maybe you've done this work. Maybe you started journaling. Maybe you started listening to maybe what's not for you. And you start to open up the space of what might be for you. And maybe you're still missing that signal. You're still like, well, I actually don't really know what I want to do here. And maybe that's partly because of society has maybe, hammered things into you of what you should and shouldn't do. Maybe it's the the limiting self beliefs that you have of like, I can't do this because I'm now 40, 50 years old or whatever it might be. So how do you go about, obviously you can remove all that noise and you can get rid of what's not right for you, but how do you know what your true calling is thereafter? Because you might create an amazing space for yourself, but then you might be like, well, what if I make this call because I don't have anything that's really calling me. I've got some interests, hobbies, etc. But if I go down this path and it's exactly the same as the path I just chose for the last couple of decades?
So absolutely, the noise to signal ratio needs to be reduced. So you can not only listen, but actually hear the signal. So I love that. I love that. The way I suggest people start is a series of different questions. If, for example, you had no limits whatsoever and could do anything that you wanted to do or wanted to be in the world, what would it be? It's those sorts of questions, just to kind of get the dialogue in our head flowing. What are you passionate about? Like maybe you love baking cookies and you do it for every holiday. And you love having the family come, or you send those cookies out in beautiful decorated tins, to family members for Christmas, for example, right? Pay attention to what you feel joy around. What feels meaningful to you? I think we automatically kind of go to this space again, linked to, having the right answer and getting the good grade to I'm either too old or, oh, no one would ever purchase that. But you'd be surprised. I mean, because I think it's less about the thing and it's more about working with someone who's passionate about what they're doing. And if you were to be able to compare working with someone who is not passionate about what he or she is doing, you can definitely tell the difference, right? So go to where your heart kind of tells you to go to. Maybe you like to read. Maybe you're an avid reader. What are you learning from what you're reading? What are the themes that kind of light you up? What do you notice about any patterns with regard to reading all those books? How could you extend or expand that in ways that would feel meaningful to you, whether it's about a job or a volunteer situation or even to your own family or team, right? So long story short, I think it's about the passion piece in particular and really knowing thyself. Know thyself, right? Know what brings you joy. Your body, again, is telling you something, whether it's joy or fear, your body's telling you something. So listen to those moments when you feel really, really inspired. And then just sit and think about it or journal about it or take a walk and reflect about it and see what emerges for you and how you might be able to give some of that thing that lights you up as the spark to maybe light others up.
And I think the reality is that if you spend 5 or 10 years doing that, but it's something you're super passionate about, something that excites you, something that you jump out of bed wanting to do, then you won't feel so bad if it doesn't turn out to be a success in the way that it was supposed to turn out, right? And maybe once you've kind of sorted your things out when it comes to the financial side of things, at least you were fulfilled whilst you were doing that. So there isn't such a disappointing outcome as if you were just taking a job for the sake of doing it for money, et cetera, et cetera. You get to the end of it, you realize, but at least you were in this situation where you choose your path with a conscious choice and with all the noise reduced. At least you did that with the full knowledge that you were going to love that, you were going to be inspired by that, and you were going to, enjoy every single minute doing it as well. So I think that makes a big difference as well. Do you find, obviously, you've got children who are growing up in different generations, and Susan, you're in a different generation as well. Do you find that different generations are getting caught into that trap, or do you still find the younger generation kind of going down that route? I'm sure that obviously having a mom like yourself, they are being instructed in different ways, obviously with the learnings that you have, but do you still find there's a little bit of a generational thing of people still making choices based on what they feel like they should be doing versus their inner calling?
Yes. And so to the first point, what I really heard you share about is the definition of success. And for me, that's about intention. How am I defining success? Because that leads into the bigger question you're asking here. What I find is people in my generation, I think, equated success more with material things like money or the house or the big yacht. What I'm learning, and I work with people, I think my youngest client is 32, so I work with people 32 to 80. So there's a pretty big span there. And the generations that are younger, success for them means making a difference. Yeah, they want to make bank at the same time, they want to make bank while they're making a difference. It's really important to them, at least in my experience. So I have lots of coaching conversations, for example, around even anxiety, to really understand at the deeper level, what do I want to do? And I went to college or university for this, that, or the other thing, and I'm not doing it. And actually anxiety around that, because they want to somehow link what they're feeling passionate about to that difference while they can financially survive. So they're here, I think, for different reasons. And I also find that it's more challenging for them to put themselves out there more externally, especially those who've come into kind of our electronic age, right? Where a lot of it is the iPhone or the iPad or the computer, and especially amplified and enhanced since the pandemic. And so how to try to help people, discover that and experiment. And again, their intention around what does success look like for me? And that's different for everybody. But if we can define that first, then the only definition of success should be my own, not somebody else's. So that's how I would think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is just a case of recognizing and digging into it and being willing to ask that question. I think I asked the question earlier today, and you mentioned that the main thing that people need to do first is they need to want it, and they need to want to understand what success means to them, and not just go down what the status quo tells them that it is. And it's hard, obviously, because there are a lot of influences. Like you said, we're living in a digital age now where there's even more opinions, not just from our inner circle that's in our physical reality, but there's our inner circle that's online, and there's these heightened expectations. There's maybe misrepresentations of reality as well. So, there's a dynamic to really unpack from that perspective. But I do think that's another conversation for another day. We could certainly be on that for another hour. But Susan, I've loved this conversation. It's been super fascinating and very insightful indeed. And I want to ask a final couple of questions. And the first one I have for you is, what impact do you want to have on the world with the work that you do?
Yeah, the impact that I really want to have in the world is about how to create harmony, and how to do that with regard to inner harmony. So being in alignment with ourselves, and how that then expresses or expands into the outer harmony. And as part of that, create openness in ways where I'm not defending my strong opinions, because when we defend, we divide. But instead, I am seeking other opinions and holding those differences as a way to create that harmony. And the ripple out effect that would have, in my humble opinion, could be a game changer.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I couldn't agree more. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up with the work that you're doing?
Great, thank you. So I'm on some of the social medias, LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And then my website is generoninternational.com, and you can find a lot out about me there as well.
Amazing. I'll make sure all of that is in the show notes below. But Susan, thank you so much for your time today. I truly do appreciate it. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for all the work you do, Elliot. It's just so beautifully inspirational. Thank you.